Hello. Welcome to Awkward Devs Layer call 2 to the 7th. This is issue 966 in the PM repo. We will spend as much time as we need on Deneb today as we're in kind of final launch preparations. I'm not sure if there's anything outstanding other than quick recap. Moving on to Electra, I will attempt to give an editorialized outstanding EIP discussion recap, which will certainly be wrong, but maybe we'll spark some discussion. There is a proposed issuance curve adjustment research post that is out that we'll also discuss. Then beyond that, generally, Atan will go over his light client roadmap possibility. Cool. Deneb, I believe we are closing in on releases and attempting to do a mainnet shadow fork and get a blog post out at the very start of this week. How are we doing on releases? Are there any outstanding releases? Any release that hasn't been put out yet?
Prism is releasing V5 just right after this meeting. We have a V5 release candidate 1, and and basically we will promote that to V5.
Same for Lodestar. We also have V 1.16 RC1 release candidate, which is likely to be promoted to V 1.16 maybe today or by tomorrow.
Okay. On both of those, are there can the people that are running the mainnet shadow fork, can they use the release candidate and begin doing their work now?
Yep, it is exactly the same.
I believe it is being used in our case as well.
Okay. Are those the only two outstanding releases? I'll take that as a yes. And Prism was right after the call, and Lodestar is doing the same by end of today, or what's the timeline?
Being recorded.
Yeah, I think our CI is running maybe in a couple of hours. It should be out. It could be sooner.
Great. Any updates on the mainnet shadow fork? Anything that we should know? Any issues? Or at least even just the expected timing?
Yeah, I can give an update on that. So we had the mainnet shadow fork go live today. We checked with both Prism as well as Lodestar that we could use the RC releases instead of waiting, and we got the okay from them. We had Genesis about an hour ago, and Denkun is live about half an hour ago. There was a config generation issue where the Nethermind config said total difficulty instead of total terminal difficulty. As a result, the Nethermind nodes offline, but it's been fixed now. And if you look at the last epoch statistics, we should be inching closer towards a perfect shadow fork. We haven't started spamming blobs yet. We're mainly waiting for exiting 1 or 2 validators so that we have the funds to spam the shadow fork to begin with. And once that's done, we'll probably put an update in there. We have Zatu running as well, but so far it looks like all the releases are good and there's no report.
So we'll have blobs being attempted to be pushed around the network prior to the fork?
And no, we weren't able to. We weren't able to exit any validator in time for having funds that would be double spent on mainnet.
Got it. Any questions for the DevOps team?
I have one quick question. From my understanding, typically for shadow forks, builder relayer MDD boosts are not tested, right? Is that a correct statement?
Usually yes, but this time we got the relay up as well. We have a bit,
Nice.
and then the validators are registered as well. But we're having the same problem as with blob spamming. We normally like there's just not much traffic, so locally built blocks are great. There's no point for the bids to be higher. So we need the validator exits to happen so that we can run this tool called MEV flood, and that will create the juicy builder transactions. And after that point,
I
they
understand.
start getting picked up by the network.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions about the shadow fork?
Just one point about the releases. I think the Flashbots team hasn't made a release for MEV Boost yet. As far as I know, they wanted to wait to see how the shadow fork goes before they make the release, but they should be making one soon.
Yeah,
Chris?
that's pretty much it. We have an alpha release that's running since a couple of testnet upgrades, and we wanted to test it on mainnet, but couldn't get the feedback from Lido or Kiln. So we are waiting for the shadow fork, and if that goes well, we tag a 1.7 release by Monday.
Great. Barry, any other updates from the DevOps team? Or testing in general? Cool. Anything else related to Deneb? Okay. I believe Tim is looking to publish blog post on Monday. So we'll be monitoring for those final releases and keep an eye on the shadow fork between now and then. Great work, everyone. Okay. I'm going to attempt to do an editorialized EIP, outstanding EIP discussion recap. I will get it wrong and we can go from there. Obviously, we're kind of at this juncture where we do have some baseline EIPs that we're eager to see. A couple of those are cross-layer and have some agreement on there. Certainly want to begin building those into a single build and getting some tests out so we can moving forward. There are a number of things that have been a bit of sticking points the past month or so. We had a couple breakout calls. I'll start with what I think is an easy one. My read on PeerDOS is that it is, and regardless of the fork, a major R&D item that a number of people across most, if not all the teams, do want to be digging deep into. Specifications are getting into a reasonable place as Argus done some R&D and as Lighthouses beginning to pick up from there. So the intention there would be to parallelize. This does not need to be launched with a hard fork, but it does need to be launched at an epoch coordination point, unless we did some additional work. I'm not 100% sure that we could do it in a non-breaking way, but I have some ideas there. Anyway, probably coordinate on epoch. And then the question becomes when to introduce a data gas limit increase EIP. If this was done far before Electra, then we could be talking about it in relation to Electra. If not, we could be talking about it either in relation to an isolated single fork. This does have to be cross-layer in the way it's specified, or in the next one. But essentially, this can be a heavy parallelized R&D item. We did have a breakout around EPBS. My read from that breakout is that although we continue to hold this as a high item, that we're given timing constraints and given where the state of research specifications are, it's not ready to be put in for Electra, but there is a lot of appetite to dig deep on here. I know there are some people on the spectrum of it's just a matter of putting the pieces together. There's some people on the spectrum of we need to do more fundamental research in design and understanding. So this can also be a major R&D item, but we need to be hitting it. You know, I think that there is a kind of steady flow on the PeerDOS stuff. On the EPBS stuff, there is not. There's kind of fits and spurts. There's some people that are trying to keep it moving. It could be a target at upcoming interop. It could be a continued kind of series of calls, but we do need to kind of, if that's going to move out of where it is right now, it needs to have more consistent work done on it. On the inclusions list stuff, my understanding is that it is less complex than I expected. I think some others expected. It is cross-layer, so it's not just a decision that we can make here. And it is, it does have the potential for more unknowns or gotchas surfacing than some of the other stuff that is currently in Electra. Just given the EIPs that are in Electra, it's just a matter of making sure specs are sound and writing good tests. We've done this kind of stuff before. ILs are close to that, but I have a little bit of, you know, I think it could, unknowns could surface in relation to potential networking, in relation to the complexities of passing things between layers. I'm not certain, but it could be something that gets added to Electra depending on appetite. It could also be something that could be ripped from Electra in the event that we do hit unexpected complexities. And then MaxiB, that conversation, I think there's a lot of agreement that it's very valuable and important. I think there's enough concern around complexity in the context of the current fork that it's not currently being pushed actively, and likely, unless it gets rekindled very soon, we put on ice for now. That's my read on those things. I think the biggest question mark would be ILs and getting a temperature gauge based off of what happened in that call last week. I saw, you know, Gajender in the chat saying +1 for Electra, but I don't have a read beyond that. Dapline does say MaxiB is not that complex in the chat. My read is that ends up being a bit architecture dependent in some of the assumptions that are based in architecture. So maybe that is true with Lodestar, but there's at least concern from the Prism side that it is. And Potez wants to agree on the scope of Electra. I believe that's probably with respect to timing. My read on scope, intended scope, almost across the board is that people want to push for a 2024 fork. 2024 fork, that doesn't necessarily mean that it launches in 2024, as we know, but having an intended target will help keep things moving. That is why when I mentioned ILs, that they could potentially be, you know, there's an intuition that maybe they're not that complex, but that we could rip out in the event that they are. That's why I did specify it in kind of that conditional manner. I think no one wants to open up the same with the PeerDOS stuff. We get the ability to kind of work on it, not integrated, but then think about how to launch it when it's ready. A bit of a different strategy than what I proposed for the ILs. But nonetheless, I do believe that on both EL and CL, there's a desire to scope things in a way that 2024 is at least realistic. And thus, potential strategy is ripping something out if that doesn't allow us to hit that target. Okay, so I do see, sorry, I'm catching up on. Gender agrees on the rip out, include IL rip out conditionally. Enrico says, if we want to target 2024, the 3 EIPs that are currently in there, plus a tentative IL. But starting work on something that's potentially ripping it out is equivalent to scoping for 2025. I'm not certain I agree. Given the EIPs that are currently scoped, obviously production grade quality is one thing, but these are likely features that with good tests could be written on the order of 2 to 4 to 6 weeks. As Dapline said, some volunteer working groups could speedrun POCs by ACDC. ILs, so a lot of that, depending on where engineering resources at, like, could be done very quickly, and then it's a matter of honing. ILs are a bit of more of a question mark, but intuitively don't seem like that much complexity. And so I think the base could be written very quickly, not including ILs, and then there can be some, side sprint on POCs in that domain to see. So I don't necessarily agree that like the ripping out strategy does mean that we end up in 2025. I do see that if it's not handled with care, or that we don't acknowledge the complexity when we hit it soon enough, that could become the case. I do think the dependency on EL and EL also quickly being done with a lot of this stuff would hold us a bit more to honesty here. Potas.
Yeah, I don't mean that the fork is going to be, it's equivalent to scoping the whole fork for 2025. It's just that if we start working on some features and we're going to divert some of our people, and we aren't large teams. At Prism, I think currently there's less than 8 people that are actually actively coding. If we're going to divert some people to work in some of these features, and these features have chances of having trouble and being ripped, then those features, I consider that those features are equivalent to scoping them for 2025 with the hope of getting them into a fork for 2024. If that's the actual status of what we're going to be doing, then I would rather have a different discussion of what are the large R&D objects that we might want to see in this fork or not. I was under the impression that the broad consensus was that this fork should be small without any large R&D objects.
I agree with that to a certain extent. I think the sticking point is, are ILs actually a large R&D object? The read from a number is that they're not quite in that domain, but that we can be careful nonetheless. There's another component of the ILs discussion, which is their cross layer. And I don't believe that we have brought this to the execution layer at all in terms of the discussion, unless I missed something, nor do we have much read on that. Mike, do you have it?
We've talked to the execution layer. Yeah, I was just gonna say we've talked a good bit to the execution layer teams. Yeah, I think in general the vibe there is that the complexity is not too high. I think if we wanted to prototype with someone, like Ref would be interested in kind of trying to speed run something too. Yeah, also I guess the Besu team, or sorry, I mix up Teku and Besu, but yeah, the consensus team that does the execution client is also involved in the discussions. So I wouldn't say they're flying blind for sure.
Right. So one strategy is to begin the Electra build with the 3 IPs that we currently have. And to, as has been stated by Mike and others in the chat, speedrun POCs to do a complexity sanity check, such that at +2 or 4 weeks from now, we can make a very clear and conscious decision whether this is an R&D item with unknowns, or if this is a easier bread and butter fork that we can just, a bread and butter feature that we can integrate into Electra. Is anyone against that strategy? I mean, the onus would be on probably Mike and a handful of others to coordinate that speed run and to report on that speed run. Yes. Affirmative. All right. I appreciate the dynamic verbal feedback I'm getting. Okay. I do think it's time to begin to build what will look like an Electra fork with the features that exist that are agreed upon. So we'll begin working on that. And in the event that in the next month we have reports back from a POC speedrunner group, then we can see where ILs fit into that build. Yeah, so Terrence asking if we need another call, like working group. I do think for coordination purposes, if there's not a good explicit place in the Discord yet, let's do that. Let's add a kind of an ILs working group chat. Maybe there is something already. And then that speedrun group can and should coordinate whatever calls are necessary to do so. They should probably lean towards the public, you know, like dropping a call link into Discord and scheduling. I don't know if they, because it's more of a kind of engineering sprint, I don't think they need to be recorded or I don't care. They can be recorded. You can do whatever you want. They don't seem of utmost importance to surface as a recorded call. Okay, I will let y'all coordinate in the chat or in Discord, and we'll go from there. Are there other discussion points related to these 4 EIPs that I attempted to summarize? Cool. Ansgar or Casper, are you here to discuss this ETH Magician's post?
Yes. Hello.
Good morning.
Hello. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, that's me. Okay. Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So basically, we just wanted to briefly kind of mention Casper and I. We also briefly talked about it already, I think 2 calls ago. We've been working, looking into kind of the current issuance policy on Ethereum, looking at the trend there, the long-term kind of consequences, and we just published 2 posts, and one of them has at least is relevant for Electra, so we want to briefly mention them. So the first post, Casper is putting them in the chat right now. It's just a more general kind of look at the current issuance policy and looking at what happens if we basically don't like do nothing and stay on it forever. And the argument there that we make basically is that with the advent of LSTs, kind of the the way to say it is basically the supply curve for stake has been flattening a lot. So more and more ETH holders are now potentially willing to participate in staking because it's so much easier with LSTs, and because our current issuance curve still pays out significant rewards all the way kind of to potentially like up to 100% stake. That means that in the long term, it's not clear where exactly kind of there would be an equilibrium in terms of stake. And indeed, you know, since the beginning of the beacon chain, we've seen a continuous inflow of stake, and we at least predict that this will not stop anytime soon. We then looked a little bit into what would be the consequences of basically like more and more, and at some point maybe say 60, 70, 80, 90% of all ETH stake. We have several reasons why we think that would be relatively bad for the network. It's probably too much detail to go into them too much right now, but basically just the intuitions being that for one, it harms solo staking viability because LSTs just have economies of scale where the kind of the more and more kind of percentage-wise or in absolute terms as well, they have under management, that basically the more lean and efficient they get, and the harder it is to compete. They also become specifically the liquidity that LSTs give users becomes more valuable as those LSTs are more widely adopted, which they would be as basically they become the dominant kind of money token on Ethereum. Also just for the general protocol, it basically would mean that over time most currency holders would basically do this via these intermediated entities, which means it just adds a governance trust layer, it adds a risk factor. At some point, they could be kind of too big to fail, bailout kind of considerations. It just you can go through the document. We laid out kind of why we think that would be a bad outcome, pretty much in detail. And then we have a proposal for basically what the end game could look like for issuance policy, like basically something that we could go to that then could be sustainable for the long-term future. We call that targeting. So basically the idea is we would specify some sort of, we would pick some sort of range of stake participation that we think is acceptable. You know, that could be something like, I don't know, 20 to 30%, or like something, you know, 10 to 40%, some basically some broad range that we pick that we think is acceptable. And then we just pick an issuance curve that, you know, you can think of it like today, where as participation drops a lot, you know, issuance rewards shoot up a lot because we really want to make sure that not everyone leaves, right? And we could do the same thing on the right side as well, where basically if we go too far beyond the maximum range that we like, basically issuance rewards go all the way down to 0 or maybe even to below 0. And that way we could really basically also guarantee a hard stop. So that's kind of that was the broad research post. And then we looked at this long-term solution we proposed, and it still has some open questions. It's very unlikely that we could kind of get there for Electra. That will require basically a big sprint on this. Seems like people already have their focus on other things. So we then looked at what happens if we basically don't do anything about this in Electra. You know, of course, it's not quite clear when Osaka, the next fork, would come, but could easily be, say, 2 years from now, or like a year and a half to 2 years. And if we do nothing for 2 more years, basically, with the current kind of maximum inflow, that we also of course with the NEP we ship this kind of maximum rate of new inflow, but even with that maximum rate, we could have up to say 40 million additional ETH coming in over the next 2 years. Of course, it's not guaranteed that it will actually be 40 million, but it could be quite a bit, and so that would already be quite unfortunate in our views, especially because also once we would want to move to targeting afterwards, if we are like way beyond the range we would end up wanting to target, it's quite painful to come back down because you basically have to set incentives so low that people literally are pushed back out of the staking set, which is not ideal. So then we looked at like what could we do in Electra that basically just is absolutely like minimal kind of overhead in terms of the fork. I mean, we've already talked here about how there's limited room in the fork, and we basically came across this curve that Anders came up with. He also briefly presented this 2 calls ago, if you remember. And the nice thing about his curve is that on a technical side, it's trivial. Like I'm not sure, Casper also already linked the spec change. It's literally 1-line change. So it would be completely trivial on the technical side, would not be a blocker for Electra or anything. We could easily do this. And so now it becomes really more a social consensus thing. Of course, any issuance policy change always is contentious. and so we are fully aware of this. So we're basically just proposing it now, hoping that we could have kind of enough of a broad conversation both here and of course in the broader community to make a decision whether to include this in lecture or not in time. And of course we could go into more detail, like show the exact properties of kind of this proposed curve and everything. I don't know. This seems maybe a bit much for now. But we are happy. I don't know, Caspar, maybe if you want to add something to what I just said, but otherwise we're also just happy to answer questions now, or maybe give people time and then on the next ACDC kind of talk about it more in detail. Caspar, do you have anything to add?
No, sounds good.
Fastly.
Yeah, hey folks, I'm Vasily from Lido. Thing I want to talk about here is, in response to this, is I think that there is like a barrier for like there needs to be more research on how this impacts the actual actors in staking. The research on like how this impact profitability and like issuance, etc., is solid, but what would happen, like how would people behave, how the actors in staking will behave when these changes happen is pretty important, because I think that like this is reducing the decentralization budget for Ethereum, and this might, like, if this change happens right now, it's basically reduces the staking rewards by 30%, and as like I think about like 70 or 80% of Ether in staking right now is on delegators. It's directly cutting into like not operators budget by 30%. Like the calculations about expected value of like how much Ether is costing, etc., etc. It's not going to play into this. They budget is like a fee on staking rewards, and this means that the actors that have the best ability to cut costs on margin, which means the largest actors, and the actors that have the ability to vertical integrate and increase the margin by like external ways. This is exchanges, this is restaking, this is potentially some like more involved MEV capture than it is right now, like private MEV things and stuff. Will have like a major upper hand in this world, and I don't think that like limiting stake amount of Ether and stake wide outweighs the like worsening of validator set. Yeah.
Ansgar.
Thanks for the comment, and I actually think there was a lot in there that I do agree with. Of course, overall the argument was we should not do this, but still, I think a lot of these problems are very much real. The problem really is that it's not that we have to make the decision between making and doing something and not doing something. If we decide not to include anything in Electro, we implicitly also make a decision, right? And that's really important to understand, because the current situation for staking is great. I agree. If we could just freeze that in time, perfect. We can't. So if we don't make a decision, we implicitly basically just allow for us to just keep sliding on this existing curve, and then basically 2 years from now, a year and a half from now, we are also in a place where yields have come down just as much because again, kind of like that's kind of how the current curve works today as well. So we have the exact same problems, right? And that's exactly kind of what motivated us in the first place. If we don't do anything but just sliding further and further up the curve, we run into the exact same problems, that there's less and less profitability, more and more centralization pressures. And so the main point here to understand is that we are comparing the kind of the dynamic endgame situations, not just the situation today. And so if we do nothing, then we would end up with a equilibrium amount of each stake that's much higher than if we do the adjustment. If we do the adjustment, yes, there's a one-time reduction, but then basically you stay at a lower level. And so if you compare that to the outcome of doing nothing, it's not actually that the yield would go down. Actually, in our post, we even make the argument that we think it's very likely that even with this curve adjustment, the equilibrium outcome yield would be higher. But I also agree, and just a second comment, you said that we should not rush into this, and I totally agree, and that's why I think we just wanted to basically start the conversation here, because the technical side of this is so trivial. I think this could be added to Electra basically up to the last moment of when we still have Electra open to even to small changes, and we should definitely take the time for this decision until then. And this is not something where we should rush include or not include a decision anytime soon.
Apologize, did you have a comment?
Ansgar just made my comment. This is just a trivial implementation. It's just a one-liner. So why aren't we pragmatic and just keep research? Currently, there's only research by Ansgar and Kaspar. Why don't we just keep researching this problem until we see enough mass? We can just, in the very last minute, just implement it. It's a one-liner.
Yeah, and I think that's probably reasonable. But to prime the pump so that we can have that conversation and not a crazy rush seemingly way at the end, now is a good time to prime the pump and to decide what other research should be done, and how to go about potentially making such a decision. All right, thank you, Ansgar. Thank you, Casper. Thank you others for comments. This is not, I mean, this isn't, unless I misunderstand, this is not even an AP at this point, but this is a set of research and a dialogue that can play out over the coming months, assuming that more research happens, more discussion happens, and we can bring it up here as that does. Any other comments for today on that one? Cool, thanks guys. Anything else on Electra? Okay, Catan has a light client roadmap possibility document that is in the chat. I'll share the link. Catan, do you want to go over any components of this?
Sure. I mean, it's a document that describes more or less the context in which those SSC EIPs and also the light client development itself fits in. Right now, if you just look at one of the EIPs, it's very technical, doesn't really explain on its own where it could fit in a larger roadmap. And I think there are two important points there. The first one is like this entire SSC-ification thing, which enables the proofs on the execution side, and further down the road also leads to decentralization of JSON RPC, because that needs proof if you don't have a trusted server anymore. And I also added to this document a similar thing for the beacon state, where we can decentralize the checkpoint sync over time with something called beacon state snap sync. Sahari presented an idea last year in Austria about it as well. And that one also needs a tiny change to beacon state, as the proposal is right now, for enabling backfilling of light client data in a canonical way. So the two things that could be done in Electra to enable all of this are this backfill enabling on the consensus side, and also the SSC proposals for transactions, receipts, and the tree roots like those Merkle Patricia tries. So I'm inviting everyone to just read this document and see if this vision is something that aligns with where Ethereum should go. And also, if someone wants to hack along, I think creating a demo that actually is based on these ideas would be interesting as well. Could be a small shadow fork with like 1 EL or so, just to see how these SSC transactions would work in practice. I mean, right now I have the website, the ETH Lite XYZ. It works by locally converting everything from mainnet, but it would be nice to have it in an actual EL as well. Yeah, that's what this document is about.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, my take here is that light clients, unfortunately, are the 7th to 10th priority on everyone's list all the time. So I appreciate you putting this document together, and I would encourage, you know, the person on each team that is paying attention to light clients to please take a look at this and comment. But any questions for Tom today? Okay, any other comments on this? Okay. Any other discussion points for today? Great. We'll keep our eye on that mainnet shadow fork and keep moving forward with this mainnet launch. Congrats, everyone. Thanks. Talk to y'all soon.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.